All right, here's my presentation on differences in bone mineral density for anaerobic and aerobic exercise. Let's get into some background here. Uh, Bone mineral density, what is bone mineral density? It is a measure that reflects the strength of bones as represented by calcium content. So everyone's bone mineral density can vary, um, but there's some health concerns when talking about bone mineral density, especially in the elderly. We see something called osteoporosis. Osteoporosis, excuse me, is a medical condition where the bones become brittle or fragile from a loss of tissue. And this could be from hormonal changes, from deficiencies of calcium or vitamin D. And osteopenia is kind of in the middle of what you'd consider normal bone uh, and osteoporosis. So on the right there, you see that little picture here. Uh, with the osteoporosis is more porous than it is bone. There's almost there's very little bone compared to what's considered normal, and because of that, you get a lot of fractures. You can get lots of fractures in typically the femur, maybe the neck of the femur, and you can even see lots of fractures happening in the vertebrae in your spine due to compression, and just it's really any other bone, whether it's from a fall or from from bending a certain way. People who have osteoporosis tend to sustain fractures much more frequently. So then it makes you wonder, how does anaerobic and aerobic exercise influence bone mineral density? Is there a way so that we can try to improve or try to change bone mineral density, especially in the elderly, so that it improves and that they don't have to experience these fractures and these weak bones? All right, let's move to the next slide here. For some more background, according to the CDC, this is back in 2008, but this was the most current that I could find here. 9% of the population over 50 years old has osteoporosis. 9 doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you think about it, 9% of the entire population over 50 is actually a pretty good number. And 49% of people over 50 have lower bone mass, so osteopenia, which is on its way to becoming osteoporosis if not handled correctly. So that, as you can see, there is a very large number of people who suffer from, if not osteoporosis, at least a lower bone mass, which will eventually become osteoporosis. So it is a very big health concern within the elderly population. According to the International Osteoporosis Foundation, the IOF, between 1990 and 2000, there was nearly a 25% increase of hip fractures worldwide. The peak number of hip fractures occurred around 75 to 79 years old for both sexes. And for all other fractures, the peak number occurred around 50 to 59 years and then decreased with age. Another statistic from the International Osteoporosis Foundation was that nearly 75% of all hip fractures occur in women. That's a very interesting statistic, and it makes you even more concerned for the elderly females out there who are breaking hips and other bones there. Um, and then one last statistic to talk about here is that approximately 1.6 million hip fractures occur worldwide each year. That's a ton, and so projected out through this organization, they came out um, with the claim that's saying by 2050 this number could reach between 4.5 million and 6.3 million. So we obviously have a pretty big health concern here, which of course is the reason why I chose to do this as my project. It is really important that we can find a way to try to reverse osteoporosis and osteopenia and overall just improve bone mineral density for elderly, of course, as a main concern, but for everybody really. And what steps can we do to reduce these numbers from happening? All right, this brings us to our problem statement. What type of exercise, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic, will yield the greatest increase in bone mineral density? This specific study wants to compare the changes in bone mineral density that take place with both anaerobic and aerobic exercise when they're both done exclusively without the other to see which one will yield the greatest increases. My hypothesis for this study would be that anaerobic style athletes will result in an overall higher level of bone mineral density when compared to aerobic style athletes. And let's go ahead and look into the methods to see how we're doing this. All right, methods for this study. This study is going to contain two groups of 20, all who have been cleared by their primary care physician. Each subject in the study will be between the age of 20 and 26. 10 males and 10 females in each group, and they all are going to be attending CBU. Pre-study bone mineral density will be recorded, and each person will be assigned to either an anaerobic or an aerobic exercise for 1 whole year. The anaerobic exercisers, they will be doing a conjugate periodization weightlifting program, and the aerobic exercisers will be doing a combination of running, swimming, tai chi, and tennis. Each subject will be given a strict schedule to follow so that each member has a similar regimen to the others, and they cannot engage in the opposite style of exercise. So if you are in the weightlifting program, you cannot go out and do some Tai Chi for a week. That's not in the parameters. The bone mineral density will be measured every 3 months using a dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, and after 1 year, final measurements will be obtained. Okay, for the statistical testing or the statistical analysis, we're going to have people randomly assigned to each group, as long as there's an even number of males and females in each group. What we're going to be using for this study is an ANOVA test, which ANOVA is essentially an analysis of variance used to test differences between two or more means. So with this test, we should be finding differences between both of the groups at the end of the study. And what I've hypothesized is that the anaerobic exercisers, will have significantly higher bone mineral densities than aerobic exercisers. I don't think that the aerobic exercisers can't have any change. In fact, I would assume that there might be some increase to some extent, but my guess is that anaerobic exercisers will have a much more significant increase in bone mineral density at the end of the study. All right, discussion. Let's do a little bit of a recap here. The purpose of this study was to look at the differences between bone mineral density after conducting 1 year of either anaerobic or aerobic exercise exclusively. So the goal was to see the variances in the level of BMD, proving that one of the modes of exercise was more beneficial with respect to bone mineral density. The key finding that I got with my data in this study was that there was a significant difference found between both the pre and the post anaerobic groups with BMD, with a p-value of 0.0076, and there also was a significant difference found between the post aerobic and post anaerobic groups, with the post anaerobic group having a much higher BMD than the aerobic group, the p-value for that being 0.0041. Through my readings with the literature review, there was a lot of studies that supported my findings that kind of coincided with what I found. Almost all of them really had the same, if not very similar, results. When comparing to the study done by Olmstead in 2011, we find our results pretty similar. Their study had 12 men and 12 women who did a series of resistance training and that they found that this mode specifically increased BMD for men, but not for women. And that's where our studies are different a little bit, because my women in my study group did improve their BMD. Um, that could be because of the style of resistance training, the length of study, demographical differences. I'm not quite sure why they didn't see improvements for the women, but just to point that out. However, our studies did complement each other quite well. Another study that I was looking at for a while there was a study done by Huey in 2015, and he looks at Tai Chi and walking on bone mineral density. According to Huey, his test group who engaged in aerobic exercises such as walking or Tai Chi didn't show any difference in bone mineral density at the end of the study. So that right there supports my findings for the aerobic exercise, in that the BMD didn't change significantly at the end of the study. Um, Although in my study and in his study, if you look at his data, um, the BMD did change a little bit in the aerobic category, but not enough to consider it significant. Um, Another study done by Rhodes in 2000 looks at elderly women as they engage in a 1 year, just like my program, a 1 year resistance training program to see if their BMD values change at the end of the study. What they found was that there was an increase in BMD, but that there was also uh, some degree of relation between strength and bone mineral density. I don't know if he was trying to prove this in the beginning of his study, but he goes on to talk about how um, he noticed that as BMD increased, so did strength. I don't think he was trying to prove that strength elicits increase in BMD, but just that there is some sort of relation. So essentially, what he's saying is, with resistance training, you will get strength increases, and you also will get BMD increases as well. And there was one study that did challenge my findings, actually, done by Song in 2010. That was mentioned in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. What they found was that 6 months of Tai Chi did, in fact, significantly improve BMD in the subject's femur. Um, but what I found out and what I read later on, and I don't know if this is what really changed his study, but um, I noticed that all of his participants were elderly women with osteoarthritis. Now, that could or could not be an example of statistical regression, where his all of his participants were at a very low end of the spectrum, and so naturally, any sort of exercise, whether it's resistance, anaerobic, or like running, or any other kind of aerobic exercise, if they're just going to naturally increase BMD because their original baseline BMD was so low. But that was one study that I found that challenged mine. Um, as for future research and conclusions, um, everything kind of came out the way I thought it would. Let's see. With the study that differed concerning Tai Chi, it could have been a difference in the style of Tai Chi. I know that there's more traditional styles or more of a anaerobic style. There's different styles. I'd have to look into that. But if I did this study again in the future, it's really important for me to make sure that all the exercises that I'm assigning people are practical and feasible or applicable to each person's everyday life. Um, an exercise program such as the year-long conjugate periodization might be too intense for many people, and so I feel like by surveys or just by evaluating results, I might be able to kind of hone in on that and change things up a bit and make it more feasible. Another factor that should be closely monitored, and I didn't do it in this study, but if I were to do it again, diet would be something that would be very important. Knowing someone's diet, that affects their body, and it can greatly shape results. It can affect energy levels. It can affect